Hey everyone, I'm Army Gaming, welcome back to my channel and welcome to Monster Analysis. Up for analysis today is Vanitus. Every morning when he wakes up, Vanitus looks in the mirror and sighs, infatuated by his own beauty. He looks at his brother Nvidia and looks at himself again and laughs. The more his brother hates him, the more beautiful he sees himself. So here we have Vanitus, and for some reason this monster reminded me a lot of Galante, but I don't know, let me know if you guys thought the same thing. And anyhow, let's move straight into the analysis. As of the time recording this video, there are a total of 31 legendary magic monsters, so I'm going to be comparing Vanitus to the remaining 30 legendary magic monsters. So starting things off with power, Vanitus boasts a power of 3,421, and in terms of magic legendary monsters, this puts him in 8th place. And I imagine that for some people being in 8th place doesn't seem like a good place to be, but this actually is a pretty high power. And now moving over to life, he has a life of 27,445, which makes him tied for 17th place along with Malaire. Malaire, as many of you know, is another amazing magic attacker. And for speed, Vanitus has a speed of 3,432, which actually puts him in 19th place along with monsters like White Pandoff and Blockhearts. Now, being in 19th place may not seem that glamorous. You should know that a lot of magic monsters tend to be deny monsters, and deny monsters typically tend to be really fast, and they tend to run lots of speedruns. So the thing about Vanitus is that he's actually an attacker monster, so it doesn't really matter that he's in 19th place. The speed alone, 3,432, that's a pretty good speed stat for attackers. And anyways, as for his trait, he's immune to possession, so this is a fantastic trait to have for a magic monster. For example, in Team Wars, if the enemy uses a magic monster with all speedruns that has an AoE possession skill on defense, that doesn't matter, your Vanitus is still going to get an attack in since he can't be possessed. This is absolutely amazing for an attacker to have. So with that out of the way, let's move on to skills. Default skills, I'm sexy and I know it. Special skill, tickets on myself. Deals heavy magic damage to all enemies, heals by 30%, gains 25% of stamina, attacker will reflect all enemy attacks back. Wow, that's a lot. So this skill has a lot going on. Right here in the little description box, it says it only targets a single enemy. However, the description itself does says deals heavy magic damage to all enemies. So I'm actually not sure whether this skill is an AoE or a single target hit. Another thing, it says heals by 30% and gains 25% of stamina, but down here it says energy points sell 50% and heal 50%. So I'm not sure what it really is. It might be a single hit, it might be an AoE. You might heal by 30%. If it's an AoE, maybe it's 30% of each target. It says gains 20% of stamina in the description. Down here it says healed by 50%. The description says attacker will reflect all enemy attacks back. And down here it doesn't say anything about having a mirror or a mirror. So that's the thing about doing analysis ahead of time, which is why I tend to not do it, but I'm already recording, so I'm going to do it anyways. I'm a little iffy on what to say. I don't think this is going to be a single target hit because it only deals 50 damage, and I don't think we've ever seen an ultimate attack that deals 50 damage to a single enemy monster. Most likely it will be an AoE. In terms of healing by 30% or 50% and how much stamina you're going to recover, I'm not sure. It could be either or, and whether or not you get mirror, I guess that's also to be determined. So I guess unfortunately I'll have to leave it at that. So anyways, with that mess out of the way, let's move on to skills group 1. We have As Proud as a Punch, Normal Inferiority, and Ego Boost. Nothing too interesting to talk about here. I do want to mention though, Ego Boost gains 25% of stamina, heals by 25%, gains damage boost, requires cooldown. This is a self skill that costs 30 stamina and it has a 1 turn cooldown. Now that I saw this skill, I would have really wished Vanitus wasn't immune to possession, because normally when a monster has a self skill, they are basically immune to possession, because normally when you're possessed, you just use a turn to recharge. If they have a self skill, they're not going to attack their team, they just use the self skill. So this would have been nice. He recovers energy points, he gets a 50% damage boost, and he recovers his life. And considering this skill only costs 30 stamina, because you recover 25% energy points, you're actually going to recover 35 stamina points. So you're going to be back to full stamina if you were to use this on the first turn if you were possessed. But because Vanitus is immune to possession, I don't think this skill is worth running. You might want to consider it if you want to recover life, but because Vanitus is an attacker, I don't think you want to waste a turn recovering 25% of your life when you can just go for the kill. So let's move down to skills group 2. We have Everybody Look at Me. Deals moderate magic damage to all enemies, requires cooldown. Everybody Look at Me is an AoE that deals 40 damage to all of the enemy monsters. It costs 38 stamina and it has a 3 turn cooldown. Honestly, to me, a skill called Everybody Look at Me is the kind of skill that should have had something like protection. But that's just my personal opinion and I'm getting off topic. Back to analysis. Everybody Look at Me, a 40 damage magic based AoE. A skill like this may or may not come in handy depending on the situation. For example, in a team wars involving magic and light, this is a really good skill to have. You could run Demise, use Strength from Beyond, give Vanitus a double damage boost, and then Everybody Look at Me is essentially doing 80 damage. And so given this monster's high power, given some strength runes, everybody look at me is going to be strong enough to one hit the enemy rarity, one hit the enemy non-magic based monster, and it's going to severely damage the enemy magic monster. And then if the enemy magic deny monster goes and tries to possess you or whatever, you can't be possessed, and then when it's Vanitus' turn again, you can just do a special based attack and wipe out the enemy magic monster, and the game is as good as yours. And then in other situations, it might not be as useful. For example, team wars involving magic, because in that case, everybody like me is not going to be strong enough to take out the enemy epic, and it's not going to be strong enough to take out the enemy magic, and it's not going to be strong enough to take out the other element. All it's going to do is damage all of the enemy monsters. It's not going to be taking out anyone. So this skill you may or may not want to run. Still though, as a rule of thumb, it's always nice to have an AoE on your attacker. The next skill is called I Love Me. Deals heavy special damage, gains damage boost, requires cooldown. I Love Me targets a single enemy, it deals 50 damage, costs 28 stamina, and it has a 2-turn cooldown. So a skill like I Love Me is a great skill to set up for a future attack. For example, you can use I Love Me and set up Everybody Look at Me, and then Everybody Look at Me will be a lot stronger. Or depending on the team war, you can use I Love Me to take out the enemy rarity, and then set up for the next attack against an enemy legendary monster. So this move is certainly usable and practical, however I'm going to advise against it because I think he has a lot better skills in skills group 3. Next up is Arrogant Punches. Deals heavy special damage, gains immunity to stun. Arrogant Punches targets a single enemy, dealing 55 damage, costs 31 stamina, and has no cooldown. And this skill gives you immunity to stun for 3 turns. Now in my opinion, this skill is awesome. It deals 55 damage and it's spammable. On top of that, you get stun immunity. One of the common monsters that you see on defense is Egg Eater. Egg Eater can possess, he can burn and blind, he can also stun. So if you anticipate Egg Eater surviving more than 2 turns, you might want to start the game off with Arrogant Punches and protect yourself from Egg Eater stunning you. And obviously, if you ever find yourself in a team wars involving metal monsters tend to stun a lot, or earth monsters especially, lots of earth monsters have stun skills, you definitely need to run Arrogant Punches. And down to skills group 3 we go, Beautiful Knuckles. Deals very heavy magic damage, requires cooldown. Beautiful Knuckles targets a single enemy, dealing 65 damage, costs 28 stamina, and it has a 1-turn cooldown. 65 damage on an attacker is what we love to see. You absolutely have to run this skill. It's pretty vanilla, it doesn't have any effects, but really, when you have an attacker with a high power, you give the monster strength runes, the skill is really strong, you don't need extra effects. This is exactly what we want in an attacker, you have to run this skill. Next up is All Is Vanity. Deals very heavy special damage, gains position, requires cooldown. All Is Vanity targets a single enemy with 60 damage, costs 31 stamina, and it has a 1-turn cooldown. Now this skill deals special base damage as opposed to magic base damage, and 60 is also a lot. On top of that, it gives you precision, so if you start the game off with All Is Vanity, the next skill you use most likely isn't going to be missing. So Vanitus has 2 great attacks, Beautiful Knuckles and All Is Vanity, and you definitely want to run both skills. All Is Vanity is going to be useful for taking out the magic monster, and Beautiful Knuckles is going to be useful for taking out the non-magic monster. The final skill we have is an interesting skill, Best View in the World. Makes target burn, attacker will reflect all attacks back, requires cooldown. This is a self skill that costs 28 stamina, has a 3-turn cooldown, and it gives Vanitus burning, but it also gives a mirror, which reflects all attacks back. So this skill is certainly very usable. The thing about Vanitus is that he's an attacker, so if you give this monster 2 strength runes, you want to maximize on attack, right? That's why you have skills like All Is Vanity, Beautiful Knuckles, maybe you're running the AoE also, but if you use Best View in the World, you're not benefiting from those strength runes, but you are going to be able to reflect attacks back. So now remember that Vanitus is an attacker and not a deny monster, but if you wanted to use Best View in the World, I think the only way to utilize this skill is to give this monster all speed runes, start the game off with Best View in the World, and you know if the enemy uses an Egg Eater on defense, Egg Eater is inherently slower than Vanitus, so Vanitus would go first, use Best View in the World, then when the enemy Egg Eater goes, if it does Burn and Blind, thanks to Best View in the World, you would reflect Burn and Blind to the enemy monsters. And yeah, sure, Vanitus self burns himself, but that's fine because Egg Eater would have burned him anyways. Maybe that's what the developers were thinking when they thought of using the skill that self burns. Or if the enemy Egg Eater does AoE possession, Vanitus can't be possessed, but thanks to Best View in the World, he's going to be reflecting the possession on the enemy monsters. So that's another potential thing you can do. Keep in mind that mirror will last for 3 turns, so you're going to be reflecting everything back for 3 turns. But if you were to give Vanitus 3 speedruns and try to use them that way, I don't think that's a good idea. You should really capitalize on his offense, on his attacks. So then you might be thinking Best View in the World is kind of a useless skill. I'm actually going to go back to giving all speedruns on Vanitus for different scenarios, but even if you were to run this monster with strength runes, so you say you give him 2 strength runes and a speedrun, he's obviously not going to be as fast as the enemy Egg Eater who's going to be using all speedruns. So say that enemy Egg Eater starts the game out with AoE possession, Vanitus isn't possessed, which means on your turn you can use Best View in the World, so if on the following turn Egg Eater does AoE Burn and Blind, you can reflect it back at him. and you still have the strength rune build, which means you can attack the following turn with all his vanity or beautiful knuckles. I guess that's a potential way to look at it if you want to use this skill. But anyways, going back to the idea of giving all speed runes on Vanitus just to use best view in the world, one setting I see this skill working is maybe in a team wars involving magic and water, because for defense, a lot of players tend to run General Thetis, and General Thetis, as you very well know, has a skill that drains all of the enemy's stamina. And so the thing is, a General Thetis has a lower base speed than Vanitus. So if you run all speed on Vanitus and use best view in the world, yeah, you get burned, but you're also going to reflect all attacks. So then if the enemy General Thetis goes and the enemy General Thetis does stamina devours, you can reflect that against the enemy team. So that's one potential scenario in which you can use Vanitus with all speed runes. And I guess another scenario I see is in a team wars involving magic and metal when you're going up against an enemy Hackster. Now this would only work if you had better speed runes than your opponent, because Hackster has an amazing base speed of 3476, so there's no way on an equal playing field that Vanitus would go before Hackster. But in a scenario where you have better speed runes than the enemy Hackster, you can totally start the game off with best view in the world, because Hackster has an AoE stun and an AoE hack, so if the enemy Hackster was to do any of those skills, you could reflect it back at him. So once again, that's another scenario where best view in the world and running all speed runes can come in handy, and also the same can be said for a lot of monsters. For example, Timerion too. You have a faster base speed than Timerion, so if you start the game off with best view in the world, and Timerion does cooldowns activated, you can reflect cooldowns activated. So I guess that's one interesting way of using Vanitus. It's a really bizarre, kind of risky way, I think, but it is a potential way to use them. All speedruns, kinda weird, but it does work in certain situations. And obviously there might be better ways to counter. For example, if the enemy has a General Thetis and you have a Frostbite, they have the same base speed, just give your speedruns to Frostbite and you can immobilize that way, but I'm just throwing it out there. Best view in the world, it's really interesting. Self-burning, reflect for 3 turns. I'm really curious what the developers were thinking, and I'm just throwing some ideas out there. And on the strange occasion that you are planning to use the all speedrun build on Vanitus, I would recommend you actually do use I Love Me and then the 2 strong skills, All Is Vanity and Beautiful Knuckles. That way you can at least deal a lot more damage than you normally would have as a speedster. But anyways, going back to your typical attacker setup for Vanitus, it's hard to say whether or not you want to run best view in the world. The main problem with this skill is that you don't benefit from any strength runes because it deals no damage. Sure, you'll reflect attacks back, but then that completely relies on the enemy attacking your Vanitus, which may or may not happen, at least not at the time you want. So my recommended skill set for Vanitus would be Everybody Look at Me, Arrogant Punches, Beautiful Knuckles, and All Is Vanity. And if you find yourself not being worried about being stunned, then I guess you can substitute Best View in the World for Arrogant Punches, but I personally highly recommend Stun Immunity, again for when you go against metal monsters, or for when you go against earth monsters, and once again, Egg Eater does have a stun skill, so you gotta be wary of that. And I guess you could technically argue that you don't need Everybody Look at Me, but again, it's always good for an attacker to have an AoE skill, because there's certainly so many wars where you can take out 2 monsters in 1 hit. And as for your rune setup for Vanitus, you want to go with 2 strength runes and a speed rune. And now to answer the question on everybody's minds, how good is this monster in terms of team wars? The answer to that is, it depends where you're at team wars, it depends what kind of runes you have. For example, I was calculating that if you have level 10 runes, if you give this monster 2 level 10 runes, Beautiful Knuckles would deal well over 28k damage on the enemy non-magic monster. That's enough to one hit a lot of monsters. All His Vanity would deal 26k damage, and that's a lot of special base damage. It's not enough to take out Egg Eater in 1 hit, however when you incorporate that you also have a deny monster yourself that's going to be dealing initial damage, it might be enough to take out Egg Eater. Now if you're a player that has like level 5 runes, Beautiful Knuckles and All His Vanity is not going to be strong enough to one hit the enemy monster, but it still will be dealing significant damage. So how good is this monster? It depends on you and the kind of runes you have. In terms of being a magic attacker, the fact that he has the 60 damage special based attack, the 65 damage magic based attack, this stun to immunity skill that's spammable, and the fact that he's immune to possession, I would have to say he's a pretty good magic attacker. And with that being said, that is going to be concluding this analysis on Vanitus. Thank you all for watching. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Please let me know what you guys think about this monster. Do you think he's good? Do you think he's not so good? How do you think he compares to other magic monsters? How do you think he compares to other magic attackers? Specifically, Malaire. Who would you rather choose, Malaire or Vanitus? This is getting into comparison series territory, but I'm just curious to know what everyone has to say. With that being said, thank you all for watching. Remember to dream big and pursue your passions.